Okay, so today we're going to try to really dig deep into these headlines coming out of India from March 18th, 2025.
All right.
And, it really runs the gamut here.
Yeah.
We've got everything from some pretty intense political battles to some pretty big economic developments. And then, some really interesting international relations stuff and even some thought-provoking social issues.
Yeah, it's really quite a mix of things happening.
It is.
But I think what's really fascinating about this is, when you look at the headlines, it gives you a sense of this snapshot of what's going on.
Yeah,
But the goal here is to go beyond just kind of reporting on the surface level of what's going on and really try to understand what are the core insights?
Right.
What are the connections between all these seemingly disparate events?
Yeah, how do these things fit together? What's the bigger picture?
And what does this tell us about India in this moment in time?
Right.
So I'm excited to kind of get into it.
All right, let's do it. So I think we should start with a headline that really kind of, reawakens some pretty strong feelings about the past.
Okay.
And that is the controversy surrounding Aurangzeb's grave.
Right.
So it seems like the chief minister of Maharashtra has had to weigh in on this historical site, the protected status of it.
Yeah, and this really is an interesting one because it goes all the way back to, I think it was 1970. The Archaeological Survey of India, they designated Aurangzeb's grave as a protected site.
Okay.
So this isn't something new. This designation has been in place for over 50 years now. And, when we think about protected sites, it becomes a legal issue, essentially, because it makes it much more difficult to alter a structure, to remove a structure, to do anything to it.
Yeah.
And so this is what is at the heart of this tension, is because you have this historical figure who continues to be a real flashpoint in contemporary politics.
And this isn't happening in a vacuum, right? There was a sort of, a sequence of events that led up to this this renewed focus on this issue. We saw Samajwadi Party MP Abu Azmi praising Aurangzeb publicly,
Right.
which then led to him being suspended from the Maharashtra Assembly.
And so Azmi's remarks really were the catalyst for this. It brought a lot of these historical grievances back to the surface. And what's especially concerning is when we start to see things like threats coming from certain Hindu organizations.
Right.
That evokes the memory of the Babri Mosque demolition.
Right.
And this kind of rhetoric is very concerning because it starts to raise questions about potential unrest, about the potential for violence, and it really highlights how historical narratives can be exploited for present-day political purposes.
Absolutely. And this this idea that you have to reconcile the past with the present. Or how do you even do that right? How do you have a diverse nation with lots of different people who have different interpretations of the past and different interpretations of history?
Yeah.
And how do you reconcile that in a way that moves everybody forward together?
Yeah, because you can't ignore these tensions.
Right.
Right? If you ignore them, they'll fester.
Right.
They'll grow. But in order to really address them, you have to have this nuanced understanding. You have to have dialogue. You have to have inclusion.
And it's a global problem, right?
Yeah.
Not just an Indian problem.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh,
I mean, so many nations.
This is an issue.
Yeah.
And it's clearly not confined to just one state. You even have Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath weighing in on this and criticizing those who are glorifying Aurangzeb and questioning their motives. So it seems to be an issue that is it has spread across the nation.
It has. It really has. And it raises this really fundamental question.
Yeah.
How does a nation remember its past? Right. How does it collectively interpret what happened? And how do you reconcile these different perspectives when you have figures who are viewed in such starkly different ways by different groups?
Yeah.
And I think what's also interesting here is, the Mumbai court even got involved. They cautioned Abu Azmi about his public statements. They granted him anticipatory bail,
Right.
which really sort of highlights this fine line,
Right.
between freedom of expression,
Yeah.
but also maintaining order and peace.
Yeah. How much can you say before it actually incites violence?
Exactly.
All right. Well, let's move on now to something completely different, but still very much within the kind of political realm.
Okay.
And that is the delimitation of electoral boundaries, which seems to be an ongoing topic of debate and discussion.
Yeah, this is a huge one because this is about the structure of Indian democracy.
Right.
And this is a debate about political representation.
Right.
About the balance of power within India.
Yeah.
And, a lot of this comes down to the concerns that are being raised by the southern states. And M.K. Stalin, who's the chief minister of Tamil Nadu, he's been a very vocal critic of the way this is going.
Mm.
Um, essentially saying, look, if you redraw electoral boundaries solely based on population growth,
Right.
we're going to lose seats in parliament.
Right.
And the reason we're going to lose seats is because we've done a good job in terms of health, in terms of education,
Right.
in terms of economic development. And these things tend to lead to lower population growth rates.
It's a fascinating argument, right?
Yeah.
We've done well,
Yeah.
and now you're going to penalize us for it by taking away representation.
Right. And so when we think about, like, what's the basis for this delimitation, it's in the Constitution.
Yeah.
The intention is to ensure that you have seats in Parliament that are allocated based on population.
Yep.
And the idea is after each census, you make adjustments. The problem is we haven't had this process since 1971.
Okay.
So we're way overdue. The next one is potentially going to be in 2026. But we don't have a recent census to guide that.
I see.
And so there's a lot of unease, especially in the South, because they feel like they're going to get the short end of the stick.
Yeah. And it's interesting because if you look at it, per capita, the South actually has more seats than some of the northern states,
It's true.
like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar.
So some would argue this is just about correcting an existing imbalance.
Right.
But the South would say, well, our current representation is based on historical agreements.
Right.
And it's based on, the contributions that we've made to India's development.
Right.
So, they've offered some alternatives. They said, well, let's increase the total number of seats.
Okay.
Or let's decentralize fiscal power.
Okay.
Right. So that we can address some of these regional disparities without, diminishing anyone's existing political influence.
Right.
And so this really highlights this north-south dynamic that's been going on in India for a long time.
Right.
But it also raises these bigger questions about, like, what does federalism really mean? Right.
What does representation really mean in such a diverse country?
Yeah, these are big questions.
These are huge questions.
All right, well, let's shift gears now and talk about another situation where international relations are at play.
Okay.
And that is the controversy surrounding USA funding in India. So the Indian government is seeking information from the U.S.
Right.
on these funds.
Yeah. Essentially, the allegation is that the U.S. Agency for International Development, so USAID,
Right.
is potentially being used to try to influence voter turnout in Indian elections,
Okay.
which is a very sensitive topic, obviously.
Yeah.
And so India is saying, we need to see your expenditures
Yeah.
over the past decade. We need to see where this money has gone. We need to understand the scope of your activities.
Right. And this isn't just, people making stuff up.
Right.
There are some specific things that seem to have triggered this request for information.
Mm-hmm.
The Department of Government Efficiency, they mentioned budget cuts to USAI. Right.
And some of that money was supposedly earmarked for voter mobilization in India.
Right.
And then you have former President Trump claiming that Biden was the one who sanctioned this funding.
Right.
So you have all this sort of, converging.
Exactly.
And creating, a reason to ask for this information.
Right. It's adding this extra layer of U.S. domestic politics to the whole thing as well.
Absolutely. And the MEA, so the Ministry of External Affairs, has also asked for specifics on the NGOs
Right.
that may have been involved.
So the NGOs that would have been the implementing partners
Right.
for these programs.
Right.
And so, this is really getting to the core of sovereignty.
Right.
The idea that, we don't want outside forces messing with our elections.
Right.
That's a very sensitive topic for any country.
Yeah.
But the U.S. has said, well, we can't give you all the information. We
Right.
have these legal provisions
Right.
that prevent us from doing that.
Right.
And this is common. I mean, this happens all the time in international relations.
Mm-hmm.
Governments are going to protect their own interests. They're going to have these frameworks in place that allow them to withhold certain information.
Right.
But of course, that creates suspicion
Of course.
when there's a lack of transparency.
Right. And S. Jaishankar, the External Affairs Minister, has said that, the government's looking into it.
Right.
The Union Finance Ministry has pointed out that there are a number of ongoing projects
Mm-hmm.
between USAI and India. A significant amount of money has been committed for the fiscal year,
Mm.
focusing on things like agriculture, health, renewable energy.
So you have this interesting dynamic where
Right.
there's a partnership going on,
Right.
but at the same time, there's this real concern about interference.
Right.
And so it really raises the question of how do we maintain these collaborations? How do we make sure that there's transparency and accountability
Right.
when we're talking about international aid in a globalized world? Because there's so much good that can be done.
Yeah.
But it has to be done in a way that's respectful,
Right.
that's transparent.
And that doesn't have strings attached.
Exactly.
All right. Well, let's move on now to a very, distressing incident that seems to be a clear act of hate.
Okay.
And that is the vandalism of a BAPS temple in California.
Yeah, this is really troubling news.
It is.
The defacement of this temple with anti-India and anti-Hindu graffiti is just deeply offensive.
Yeah.
And, it's generated a lot of concern both in India and internationally. I mean,
Yeah.
this is something that's being covered by global media.
Right.
And it really speaks to the seriousness of these kinds of incidents.
Yeah.
And, the Ministry of External Affairs in India has condemned it.
Mm-hmm.
And rightly so. They're saying, look, we need peace, we need tolerance, we need mutual respect among communities.
Right.
And it's important to remember that this temple is a cultural and spiritual hub for the Hindu community in Southern California. It's a place of worship. It's a place where people gather.
Right.
It's a place where they preserve their traditions.
Yeah.
And so to see it targeted in this way is deeply hurtful.
Yeah.
And there's been this outpouring of support, which I think is really great to see.
Mm-hmm.
It shows, the resilience of the community in the face of this hate.
It does. And it shows how important this place is.
Right.
And it's good to hear that local authorities are investigating this as a potential hate crime.
And community leaders are calling for calm.
Right.
They're calling for dialogue. They're calling for understanding. And I think in these moments, that's really the most important thing, is to have that kind of measured and unified response.
Absolutely.
And, this act of vandalism really brings up a bigger issue, which is this question of religious tolerance.
Right.
And how do we combat hate crimes globally?
Yeah.
We're trying to build inclusive societies, but that takes work. It takes education.
Right.
And it takes a real commitment to respect each other, regardless of our differences.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's switch gears now to something a little lighter.
Okay.
And this is some domestic politics news coming out of Bihar, where there seems to be a lot of speculation that the son of Chief Minister Nitish Kumar, Nitishant Kumar, is going to get into politics.
Yeah, the rumor mill is really churning on this one.
It is.
Union Minister Jitan Ramanji has been making some public comments that seem to support this idea. He's calling Nitishant Kumar capable. He's calling him competent. And he's even, sort of drawing a parallel saying, look, this is what happens in politics.
Yeah.
Kids follow their parents.
It's a family business.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
And it's not just talk, right? There have been some, visible signs of this as well. Like Nishant appeared alongside JDU leaders.
Right. During Holi?
During Holi. And then there was a pro-Nishant poster.
Right. At the party office.
At the party office.
Yeah.
So it seems like they're, putting out some feelers.
Exactly. They're testing the waters.
Yeah.
They're seeing what the reaction is going to be.
Yeah. And, interestingly, Manji was also pretty critical of another politician.
Right.
Tej Pratap Yadav from the RJD.
Yeah.
He was seen telling a police officer to dance.
During Holi. Yeah.
And so, there's this kind of contrast that he's drawing here.
Exactly.
On the one hand, you have this potential newcomer, who's seen as capable and competent. And on the other hand, you have this, more established figure.
Right.
Who's behaving in a way that's being seen as inappropriate.
And I think it really gets to the heart of this question of, what is appropriate conduct for people in positions of authority?
Right.
How do we hold our leaders accountable?
Yeah.
And so, this is playing out in Bihar right now. And it's really a fascinating sort of microcosm of the larger political landscape where you have these questions of tradition and power and, what does the public expect?
Absolutely. All right, let's turn to Indian cinema now.
Okay.
We have a situation where the film Santosh is having a hard time with the censors.
Right.
Despite receiving some really significant international acclaim.
Yeah, this is kind of a head-scratcher.
It is.
The film has won awards at the Asian Film Awards, including Best Actress and Best Director, which, tells you something about its quality.
Right.
But here in India, it's facing these challenges with the CBFC.
Right.
And it seems like they want some changes made
Right.
that the filmmakers are not willing to make.
Right. And this is even after they approved the script initially.
Right.
And the film received government incentives.
It's a weird situation.
It is.
And it really shows you how complex this censorship process can be in India. And the fact that the filmmakers are pushing back so hard suggests that they really believe in their vision.
Right.
And they're not willing to compromise the message of the film.
Yeah. And so for those who haven't seen Santosh, it tells the story of a widow who becomes a police constable. And she's investigating the murder of a marginalized girl.
Right.
So it seems like it's dealing with some pretty important social issues.
It is. It is.
And Shahana Goswami,
who won Best Actress.
Yeah.
She said that the film has these universal themes.
Right.
It can resonate with anyone.
Yeah.
It's not just specific to India.
Yeah, it's about, loss and justice and resilience. These are human experiences.
Exactly. And while all this is happening in India,
Right.
the film's doing really well internationally.
Yeah, it's playing at festivals. It's coming out in the UK.
Right.
So it's interesting that it's being embraced abroad.
It is. It is.
And the producer, Mike Goodridge, is pretty frustrated.
Yeah, I can understand why. Yeah, I mean, you have this success. Right. And then you have these roadblocks at home.
It's a strange situation.
It is.
All right, let's move on to something a little more personal.
Yeah.
But also very much, a reflection of the social landscape in India.
Okay.
And that is Shikha Paharia's response to a casteist comment online.
Yeah, this is really important.
It is.
Because you have someone who's in the public eye.
Right.
Who's directly confronting this issue of caste-based prejudice.
Right.
And so the comment itself was just, disgusting.
Yeah. But you are a Dalit.
Yeah, I mean, it just shows you how deep this prejudice runs.
Yeah, it's still there.
It's still there.
And, he doesn't always engage with this kind of stuff online, but he felt like he had to address this one.
He did.
He called the comment pathetic. He criticized this backward mindset. And then he talked about inclusivity and the diversity of India.
Right.
Which was, I think, a very powerful message.
It was.
And, for context, he's the grandson of a former home minister.
Right, Sushil Kumar Shinde.
Yeah.
So he comes from this family with a background in public service. And, it's unfortunate that this happened.
Yeah.
But I think it's good that he spoke out.
Yeah.
Because we need to keep having this conversation about social justice and inclusivity.
Right.
And it's not just about, being nice to each other. It's about dismantling these systems of discrimination that are still in place.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's talk about some international figures who have been making news in India. Tulsi Gabbard, the former U.S. Director of National Intelligence, visited recently, and she's expressed a very deep connection to India.
Yeah, her visit seemed to be quite meaningful.
It did.
She talked about feeling at home in India. And she has a lot of personal ties to the culture, to the spirituality, even to the cuisine.
Yeah, she talked about the Bhagavad Gita as being a source of strength and peace. And she participated in a lot of different events while she was here, including the Resina Dialogue.
Right, which is this big global forum. They talk about, geopolitics, geoeconomics.
Yeah.
And, she talked about working with Indian leaders to strengthen ties between the U.S. and India.
Right.
And so her visit really highlights the importance of these personal connections that can help bridge countries.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's move to the world of sports now.
Okay.
And Virat Kohli.
Yeah.
He had some really interesting things to say about the impact of the Indian women's cricket team.
He did.
And how their success has really changed the perception of women's sports in India.
Right. He was very clear that the team's performance has had this transformative effect.
Right.
And it's not just talk. I mean, they've been winning medals. They've been achieving these high rankings.
Yeah. They took silver at the Commonwealth Games, gold at the Asian Games.
Both in 2022.
Yeah.
And their global rankings are incredible.
Yeah, they're number 3.
in both T20 and ODI.
Yeah.
And Coley specifically said, this is why we have the Women's Premier League now.
Right.
This is why the WPL exists, because they've created this momentum, they've created this public interest.
Right.
And it's interesting because if you think about it, the men's IPL,
Right.
that started in 2008.
Yeah.
It took 15 years
Yeah.
to get a comparable league for women.
Yeah.
And so that shows you how far we've come.
Right.
And Coley also talked about the importance of creating a sports culture that values both men and women equally.
Right.
And Moya Dodd, who's a former Australian soccer player, she was also involved in this conversation. And she drew a parallel to what happened in Australia with the Matildas,
right,
their national women's soccer team.
Yep.
And how their success really led to these broader social changes.
Right.
And so it's a really great example.
Yeah. Of how sports can be this catalyst for progress.
Yeah, it can change the world.
It can.
All right, well, let's move into the financial sector. The RBI is encouraging financial institutions to adopt AI.
For a very specific purpose.
Right.
Which is to handle customer grievances.
Right. And this is something that Sanjay Malhotra,
the RBI governor, has been really pushing.
He has. And it seems like there's a real need for this because they had over 10 million complaints last year.
It's a huge number.
It is.
And, as the financial sector grows, as it serves more people, this problem is only going to get bigger.
It is. So how can AI help with this?
So AI is really good at analyzing data.
Okay.
And when you think about all those complaints, that's a lot of data.
Yeah.
So AI can look for patterns. It can say, okay, we're seeing a lot of ATM failures at this location.
Okay.
Or we're seeing a lot of erroneous charges from this vendor.
I see.
And then they can be proactive. They can issue alerts. They can say, hey, we're aware of this problem.
Right.
We're working on it.
Yeah.
And then you also have AI-powered tools like chatbots, voice recognition systems that can help people who maybe don't speak the same language.
Right.
So it can really make the process more accessible to a wider range of people.
Right. But Malhotra was also clear that this doesn't mean we get rid of human beings.
Of course not.
Right. We still need to invest in our people.
Right, because technology can't replace everything.
Right.
You still need that human touch.
Yeah.
You still need empathy.
Right.
Especially when you're dealing with complex issues.
Absolutely. So it's got to be a balanced approach.
It does.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about some economic news.
Okay.
It seems like there's been a decline in India's exports for February of 2025.
Right. So this is the fourth month in a row that we've seen this decline.
Okay.
And in February, they hit $36.91 billion worth of exports.
Which is down from $41.41 billion in February of 2024.
Okay.
And there are a few reasons for this.
Okay.
The global economy is uncertain.
Right.
Oil prices are fluctuating.
Right.
And we also have this thing called the base effect.
Right.
Which basically means that last year, February was really high.
Okay.
So when you compare to that, it makes this year look worse.
Right, right. It's all relative. Yeah. But it seems like the trade deficit has actually narrowed.
That's the good news.
Yeah.
So the trade deficit is the difference between imports and exports.
Right.
And it shrunk to $14.05 billion.
Okay.
Which is the lowest it's been in over 3 years.
Wow.
And that's mainly because imports have fallen even more than exports.
I see.
So things like crude oil, gold, silver.
Okay.
All those imports have gone down.
Right.
And one thing that's interesting is if you look at non-petroleum, non-gems, and jewelry exports, those have only gone down a little bit. But the imports in that same category have actually increased.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that tells you something about, what's happening domestically.
Right.
But overall, if you look at the whole fiscal year from April to February, exports are still up 6.24%.
Okay.
Year over year.
Right. So not too bad.
Not too bad.
And then you have some analysts who are pointing out that this narrowing of the trade deficit is partly due to that base year effect.
Right.
Because last February had a leap day.
Exactly.
So it's a little bit of a statistical anomaly.
Yeah. These are the things that you have to keep in mind when you're looking at these numbers.
Right.
But overall, I think it shows that.